Hey, this is Chris, and I'm back with another screencast about DBUnit. Now I'm going to show you how to load datasets for DBUnit to use. There are a few ways that we can load datasets, so let's go over them. You can do datasets as XML, and I know it's XML, and newer programmers complain about having you use XML. I used XML for years. Don't be afraid of it. It's just a data format. Not everything can be JSON. So here's a little snippet. If I wanted to import datasets for DBUnit using XML, I grabbed a little bit of data from OpenCFP. So just let me show you what it looks like. So as you can see inside here, it's well-formatted XML, specifically being used for MySQL. And so we simply have a node that is named after our database that we want. In this case, we call the database CFP test. And then we define our tables. And then for every row that we want to be in that table, we are defining fields with names and values. So as you can see, it reads a lot like English. You should be able to look at any one of these type of XML data sets and basically figure it out. In this case, this is an entry in a couple of tables. We have the groups table. We have a speakers table. This is for a friend of mine, Stefan Koopmanschap, who's a PHP developer from the Netherlands, who had submitted talks to a conference that I ran. So this is a grab with his permission. I grabbed a little bit of information and we put it in here. So you can just basically see we're representing the data that we wish to be inserted into the tables by DBUnit by putting it in an XML format. So if we wanted to load this in, we go and implement the getDataset method. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. You can see we still have the same DSN here that we're using for PDO. But luckily, there's a nice little shortcut. There's a built-in method for handling datasets. So we just go this create XML dataset, and we tell it the actual dataset that we want to be imported. So it's very, very simple. But of course, one of the drawbacks to using an XML dataset is that if you have null values in your data, because you might have fields in your database where things are optional, you'll have to put a placeholder into the XML data and then replace it, do a search and replace, so that any time you find the placeholder in the data, we want the code to replace it with a null value, and then we go ahead and insert everything in. So just let me show you an example of that would look like in our data set here. So you can see, for example, we're just doing a tiny snippet here. And say we had the speakers row, and Stefan is in here, and he's given us information for the info field. But we declared that anything in the bio field was optional, so we know that it's going to be null, but we can't put null values inside XML. So instead, we have this placeholder of 3 hashes, a null, and then another 3 hashes. Just something that sticks out right away if you're looking at this data set. So how do we handle importing this now? How do we do it? So I'm going to show we have a little fourth sample. It looks very, very similar, but the difference is that we create, if you look at starting at line 18, we'll say, let's import this XML data set with the placeholder in it. And then we create a brand new object that is used by DBUnit that just for data sets and says, I'm creating a replacement data set based on the initial data set. And then on line 20 there, we're saying add full replacement, basically saying anytime you find triple hash, null, triple hash, replace it with a null value, and then we return the data set. So again, that's very, very simple, and I think it's kind of straightforward. So one of the other neat things that we can do by using XML is that we can also, if we have multiple XML data sets, we can merge them together. So just let me show you how this works. Again, it's extremely straightforward, but we're doing something a little bit different in the getDataset method. So you can see if we start looking at line 18. First thing we do is we need to tell it we're going to be working with a merged data set. Then we create an array that contains the path to the actual data sets on the file system. And then we iterate through the list of data sets. And we do, you can see on line 22, we're saying I want to create an XML data set based off of this file. And then we just say using the merge one, we want to add this data set in. And then at the end, in line 26, we return it. So I've shown you an example with XML. What if we want to use something like YAML? If you're like a Ruby person, let me show you what a YAML data set would look like. This is from a different app that I wrote. I have simulation baseball as a hobby of mine, and so I wrote a web app to kind of maintain all the transactions and things for the league, so we can keep track of who has who and how many points have accumulated and things like that. So you could, if you like it, store your data in YAML format, so you can see kind of like how the XML data sets work. We have the name of the table at line 1, and then on lines 2 and 9, we're indicating we have a row, and then we're providing all the data that we expect to be inserted into our database. Just a word of warning, if you're dealing with these YAML files, if you have strings with spaces in them, make sure, well, actually any string is probably a good practice to surround it in double quotes so that when it's importing the data, it knows that it has a complete long string. And how would we go about importing that one? Let me show you. It's in sample number 6. Same thing, we're using all the same stuff, except, again, we're lucky we have a built-in method that just simply says, return this data set all formatted and ready for DBUnit to use. How about one more I can show you? What if you have a bunch of data that you need to import that's in a spreadsheet? Use some of the same data. Say we're having some data where we have accounts for people and we have to know whether they're paid, not paid, whether it's a free account. So again, we can provide this info in a CSV file. The first row is always all the names of the field. We can't provide any table information in the CSV file, so make sure to keep that in account. But you can table names, and then for each row, we just have one line. And again, we're doing the same thing. If it's multiple words or it's a string, it's a really good practice just to enclose it in double quotes. And then if we actually want to import it, we have a built-in method that lets us do that too. There we have it. If you look at line 18, we're saying I'm going to be creating a CSV data set. I want to add a table. We have the name of the table. Then we say here's the data set. Then we want to return it. So very, very, very straightforward.